Excited to have District 21 Captain Dale Grandstaff with us tonight. He's going to walk us through some of the things that you have to think about when scoring deer and how to score deer. He's an official scorer for Boone and Crockett. He has been since 2003. And he's very knowledgeable about deer. I'm glad to have him on tonight, and I know y'all are going to learn a lot. All right, so there's Dale, and I'm turning it over to you. Thanks, Dale.
I don't know how much you're going to learn, but we'll try. It'll be kind of it may seem a little bit unorganized when we start, but as we go through this, hopefully we'll get some organization to it, and you'll be able to learn a little bit on some of the basic stuff that I get, questions that I get asked all the time. I guess, Barry, just go around the room and just give them an idea of kind of what we're going to be looking at tonight, because some of these racks may be similar to what they have shot and would have questions about. We've got a lot of sheds, a lot of skulls, a lot of drop tines, a lot of splits, kickers, triple beams.
Lots of unique racks.
Yeah, unique racks in the group. Big non-typical right there. But a lot of this stuff is what you're going to typically see in Tennessee. Some of the stuff I show you is going to be a little unique, but most of it's going to be typical stuff you're going to see in the state. I'll kick it off with what I consider a large deer for most people in the state. You can see this is just a typical 8-pointer. Long G2s, long 3s. He'll probably gross around 140, somewhere in there. But the one thing that I wanted to show about this is all racks will get 4 circumference measurements. It doesn't matter if it's an 8-pointer, if it's a 6-pointer, a 20-pointer. They all get 4 circumference measurements. Even this little guy. It's an 8-pointer, but it's going to get 4 circumference measurements.
Primarily, we're talking about Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young.
We're going to be talking about the Boone and Crockett scoring system, and that's what our agency recognizes. So when I say the scoring system that we use is going to be Boone and Crockett, it's the same thing as Pope and Young. It's the same thing as the Long Hunter Society, which is muzzleloading. So anything we score is going to be based off of Boone and Crockett. With that, the main, I guess the most common question I get asked is, I shot an 8-pointer. Does it get 3 or 4 H measurements? And by H, I mean circumference measurements. This is probably the most common question that I get asked. So as an 8-pointer, it's going to get 1 circumference measurement there, 1 there, 1 there. And those are the easiest to find because they're between points. The 4 circumference measurement is going to be on the end, between the tip of the main beam and the mid part of this G3. So that midpoint right here is going to be the 4th H measurement. All racks get 4 H measurements. So that is probably the #1 question that I get asked.
What if it's a 10-point?
If it's a 10-point, it's easy because there's the H1, first circumference, the H2, the H3, and the H4 is easy to find because you have this G4. Easy to find it right there. Same thing on the side. H1, H2, H3, H4. And that's probably, like I say, the most common question that people get confused with. I'm going to pick up a shed right here behind you. This is a little odd, kind of a dink deer. We'll just pretend this little abnormal point isn't there. So the other side would have 3 points, a brow point, a G2, and a main beam. He's going to be a 6-pointer, a main frame 6-pointer. Mm-hmm. He has to also get 4 circumference measurements. And in order to get 4 on this one, you do between the burr and the brow tine, H1, between the brow tine and the G2, that's the H2, the smallest point in there, So you're trying to find the smallest point between those points. So where is his H3 and his H4? Find that midline, go from there to the tip of the main beam, find the center point, measure that circumference, and you put that down twice. That's how you get the circumference measurements for a 6-pointer. 10-pointer is easy.
The 6-pointer, the third circumference gets counted twice.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's another common question. So I just want to get the circumference out of the way. We'll do some of those in a minute. You're trying to find the smallest point in there for the circumference. But what I want to do is probably get Jason to pull that deer photo up that I sent you. He'll share it with everybody. And I just want to talk about this one deer that a friend of mine killed in Montgomery County. Okay, this first photo is the summer of 2018, and nice, big, heavy, a not very nice 8-pointer. Okay, go to the next slide. That's him after he lost his velvet. So you can see there's no blemishes, no marks on his body from old wounds or anything on him. And he's got still a nice rack out of velvet. Go to the next slide. He was shot opening day of muzzleloader of 2018. The shot went through the deer in a killing spot. This deer should have dropped, should have been in the woods laying there. That is the entrance wound. Go to the next slide. That is the exit wound. So approximately 2 weeks after he shot this deer, he thought it was probably dead in the woods somewhere. And he looked and looked and looked, couldn't find it. Several of us went up and helped him look for it. He got it on trail camera and the deer was still living. And so we thought, like everybody would think, he's going to probably live. And then next year, he's going to come back and have some kind of funky, messed up rack. So go to the next slide. And this is a velvet shot in 2019. As you can see, he got more massive and he doesn't have a messed up rack. But look down below his right main beam, behind his shoulder, you see a bump. You take down a little bit lower, look right there. That bump, that's the wound where it healed up through the summer. And then go to the next slide. And that's the deer 2019 in September after he shed the velvet off. Notice his rack is perfectly symmetrical. There's no damage to it, even though he had that massive wound on his side. And it just goes to show you that these deer can take a punishing blow like that from a gun and still live and make it. So a lot of people think I lost that deer, but a lot of times they will make it through a gunshot wound or a car hitting them or anything like that. But he did harvest that deer with a bow that fall, probably field dress a little over 200 pounds. It's just a gigantic deer. The wound was still there. It was still oozing a little bit of pus, but it just wanted to kind of demonstrate that they don't always have a messed up rack after they get damage to their body.
That's unusual because usually the trauma causes that one side to grow really funky or small.
And most people would have thought that deer would have died.
Right.
No doubt.
Right.
But he didn't. Just goes to show you that they will make it through a lot of trauma. Let's go to a score sheet. And I'm just going to get a typical Boone and Crockett score sheet. And I'll kind of hold it up so Barry can see it. This is a typical, you can download this online, Boone and Crockett score sheet, and it shows right here on top the minimums for a typical whitetail. 160 makes the awards, but 170 is what you're looking for. Most people, 170 is the typical all-time for Boone and Crockett, and that's with a gun kill. And it could be an archery kill also to make the 170, but this is a typical whitetail deer is what you're looking at. And the letters on here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when you hear people talk about the H measurement or the G1 measurement, it really has nothing to do with the antler itself. It's just where it falls on this score sheet. So H measurement has nothing to do with what the rack looks like. It's just a matter of where it falls on this sheet and how they alphabetized it. So a typical white-tailed deer, you would use this sheet to score a typical white-tailed deer. And these are all available online. You can download them and score them yourself online. This is for a non-typical white-tailed deer, the Boone and Crockett scoring system. And you're looking for a 195 all time on that one. 185 makes the awards system, but all time is 195. Again, download it from online and score it yourself. These are very difficult. Non-typical deer can get into the realm of the Tucker buck. And the Tucker buck was the most difficult deer that I have ever scored and will ever score, because it was so subjective to, okay, how long is this point? Is this a point? Where does this point come off? It was just so difficult, but we scored it 2 times in a row, and we were within 3/8 of an inch of the score. So it was a pretty good score. Although he finally came up with a 315, just over 315, which is 3 inches more than what we scored it at. And the reason for that is palmation of a rack. You can go a little deeper in palmation and get more length. And that's what the panel did at the awards banquet. They got more in a few spots.
Yeah.
And again, the same thing. I'm just going to hold these up. This is Pope and Young typical score sheet and Pope and Young non-typical score sheet. The Pope and Young non-typical minimum score is 155 for non-typical and is 125 for typical.
Now, Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett, either one, what makes a rack a non-typical? Is it 1 point, or is it?
It depends on, sometimes a rack can make the registry as a typical or a non-typical. The same rack can make the registry. At that point, it depends on what the owner of the rack wants to do. It can only go make it typical or non-typical. The owner decides where he wants to put it.
Gotcha.
And if it has several abnormal points coming off of it, it's probably going to go into the abnormal, a non-typical category. If it's fairly symmetrical with 1 or 2 kickers, it could go in the typical category. But a straight up clean rack is going to be typical category.
And I don't have a picture of it with me, but the state record typical, I've seen it, and it's what that was harvested back in the day,
like 58,
yeah,
56.
But talk about a symmetrical rack.
Very symmetrical, and it takes a very big, long, a lot of length is what it needs. It doesn't have to be massive. It just takes a lot of length to get a lot of score, high score.
Okay.
Mass looks good, but length is what gets you your score.
Okay.
For those of you that are interested in our Tennessee Deer Registry, here's the minimums. So typical 115 bow, 140 gun, and 125 muzzleloader. Non-typical is 140 bow, 165 gun, 150 muzzleloader. For those of you that may or may not have had a deer scored and you're not seeing it in the registry, we revamped the system this past year. So the system was totally redone. We pulled over the information from the old system, but I'm sure at some point you lost some information. It's still up there on the hill. We've still got it, but if you don't see your name in there, you may contact the Region 5 office and see if they can pull it up, see if they can find it and get it, make sure it's in there. For those of you that may have had one scored recently, it may not be entered yet because this new system, not everybody's in it yet. Some of the people that were in the old system haven't transitioned into this new system. So it'll be a matter of time, but if you had one scored, more than likely, it's just a matter of time before it gets entered in there. So be patient with them. I know I've got a few that I've still got to get in because this is a new system to me. But I've actually, when I get my score equipment out and I go through it, I'll look and see if I've got a new one I need to put in there. And I put one in a couple weeks ago and a few weeks before that. So just be patient. They'll eventually get in there.
So speaking of tools, if I want to score my own deer, what would I need?
The basics you need is like a yardstick, something to lay flat, and everything you score is going to be in 1/8. Everything is in 1/8 because that's the way it's easy to add it up. Don't do it in quarters, don't do it in halves. Everything goes to the nearest 1/8. You need a carpenter's measure, this folding measure tool. This is how you get the inside spread, because you can use that slide and put it in there. And I'll demonstrate this in a few minutes on a couple of deer. But this is an important tool right here. You need that. You also need something to get circumference. And the best thing to get circumference is to have that gap at the front of your tape. This gap allows you to wrap it around the beam and come back to that line like that. If you don't have that gap, you're always trying to pull it to the tip right there, and it's difficult. This makes it easy. You need a cable.
And what's the cable for?
The cable will just makes it easier for you to line it up on a point. Start at the end of the point, go to the tip, and when you go to the tip, the end of the point, you just attach a clip to it. When you attach that clip, you take that down and you can measure it. It's just a lot easier. That's 15 1/8. So cable, clip, flat ruler, carpenter's measure as far as to get the spread, and the circumference. That's basically it, and the score sheet. So the tools are easy to find, easy to get. If you need something to get circumference with, Boone and Crockett, if you go on their website, you can get anything you need from their website. They'll ship it to you. Costs a little bit, but it's not that much, and you can score your own deer. So with that, we'll get into, I want to show you a typical rack versus non-typical. And you asked that question a few minutes ago. What's typical versus non-typical?
Right, because, if I've got one or two kickers, does that make it non-typical, or can it still be scored as typical?
This one is a clean 5-point side. So I'm going to assume this is a shed that I picked up. I'm going to assume the other side is a match or just exactly identical to it. This is what we call a typical rack. It's got a base with no stickers. It's got a G1, this first point. It's got a G2 with no stickers, a G3 with no stickers, a G4 with no stickers. And in the system, when you score, this is a typical 10. You could have a typical 12, 13, 14 pointer. It only goes up to a typical 14 pointer. I've never seen anything over 14, but it's possible. If that's the case, then if you had it officially scored, the score would contact Boone and Crockett and say, hey, we've got one that has more than the sheet will allow. And we would just do a different sheet with it. But typical, there's no deviation on the straight up points off of the main beam. Now, non-typical, they can get crazy. This isn't crazy, but this is odd. Very long beam on it. It's got a very typical rack inside this, a G1, a G2, G3, G4. But it's got a split coming off the G2, and it's got little kickers off of the G3. This is definitely going to be a non-typical rack. It's going to score as a non-typical. This point right here alone will make this drop so much. If you try to put it in the typical category, this will take so much off of it that you don't want to put it in the typical category. It'll score really low. You want any non-typical growth to be added to your rack, and that's what non-typicals do. But non-typicals can come in all shapes, sizes. If it's coming straight up off the rack, it's an absolute typical. But if it has any deviation whatsoever, this one has a big long drop on it. This would definitely be a non-typical rack with this long drop. I get a lot of questions on this. Where's the main beam on this one? The main beam, you want to start right here, right behind where the eye socket was, and you measure all the way around. Anything that starts to turn down on this beam is still considered the main beam. If it keeps turning down, and I don't know if, Barry, if you can see it, but that big deer up on the wall there, see how the main beams turn down?
Yep.
That's the main beam.
So it's split at the end?
Yeah, split at the end, but as it turns down, you still follow the downward turn.
Okay. Yeah, I can't zoom in on that.
I want to show just another couple of non-typicals. Here's a very clean, every rack within the non-typical points is going to have a typical frame. This deer is going to have a typical, if the other side matched, a typical 8-point frame. G1, G2, G3, main beam. but it's got these little stickers coming off of it. It's got a big drop curled sticker coming off. It's got 2 little stickers coming off that and another point here. There's going to be enough to put this in the non-typical category. This is going to deduct from this rack if it's in the typical category. So if you pretend that's not there, yeah, that's a really nice, heavy 8-point frame. But this makes you want to put this in the non-typical category. It's going to be enough to throw it down there. Again, what we're looking for in every rack is the typical frame. So this is going to be scored as a non-typical, but what's the typical frame? He's got a G1, G2, G3, G4 main beam. The other side, if it matched, and it did, this would be a typical 10-point frame with a bunch of stickers.
Yeah.
So the 10-point typical frame is what we're looking for, and then we add this trash into it to give it its
score as
score.
non-typical.
Yeah.
Even if it matched perfectly on the other
If
side?
it matched, it still doesn't matter. It's all about the symmetry coming off of the main beam.
Okay.
Okay, this one, I brought this one on purpose for a reason. Okay, this one is typical. You got a G1, G2, G3, G4, G5, typical 12. Even though this point comes up and curls back, I don't care if it curled and dropped down like this, that's still a typical point because it's coming off the main beam. It doesn't split, it doesn't do anything. You just measure that point, and that would go down as a typical point. It's not a non-typical point.
Now,
it's typical.
Question for you. If the other side of that rack, we don't have it, but if the other side of that rack only had 4 points.
G1, G2, G3, G4, and a main beam.
Yep.
Then if it only had 4, this would be a deduction on the typical rack.
Okay.
Because it doesn't match. So let me go to a rack that is typical. This one right here. This is very typical, very symmetrical 12-pointer. There's no splits. There's no points at the base. There's nothing on this rack that is non-typical. It's all very symmetrical, very typical. The only deductions, and Boone and Crockett is based off of symmetry. So a lot of people say, I don't like the net score. I only want to know the gross score. Well, most people just want to know the gross score. But if you want to enter it into the Tennessee Registry, Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, any registry that we recognize, you have to do the net score. And the net score is based on deductions. So deductions for this rack, it's very symmetrical, but deductions for this rack, let's say this main beam is 25 inches long. This main beam is 25 inches long. There's no deductions there. They're both the same. The G1, let's say this one is 4 inches and this one's 3.5. There's a 1/2 inch deduction already. The G2s, let's say they're both 7, no deductions. The G3s, let's say this one's 6 and this one's 7. There's a 1 inch deduction, and so forth as you go out the rack. That's the only deductions. Then you come back to the circumferences. They have to match. If there's a 1/8 difference, that's a deduction. So when this deer gets scored up and entered into the registry, it's going to be the net score, not the gross score. But most people just want to know, what's my deer got on his head? This deer on his head has about 166. Net is going to be 160.
Gotcha.
That's a very
That's pretty good. That's pretty good score though for a typical.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about this deer in just a few minutes, a little later on. Jason, do you have anything pressing right now that you want to ask, or?
Nobody's asking any questions yet through the chat. I did have one that people might be thinking, what makes it Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young? What's the difference?
Okay, Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young is going to be archery harvest only. And Pope and Young, of course, the minimum score is lower, 125 for a typical. So, but it's going to be archery only. And it does not include crossbow. That's a different category. So if you shot it with a bow, you could enter it into Pope and Young. You could also enter it into Boone and Crockett. If you shot it with a gun, you can't enter it into Pope and Young. It can only go into Boone and Crockett. If you shot it with a muzzleloader, you could enter into Long Hunter Society and also into Boone and Crockett. Did that make sense?
Yes, it did.
Okay, all right.
The long hunter side of things, is that
It's the muzzleloader. It's the muzzle aspect of hunting. I think they were created like 1988, and it was just for that purposes of people. When muzzleloading started to kind of kick in and get big, they started to create that system for people that shot them with a muzzleloader.
Okay, awesome. One question just came in. Is it correct you cannot officially enter a velvet buck without removing the velvet?
Yeah, if you want to, the velvet creates problems with mass. It creates problems with tine length and beam length. It overinflates the score. So that is correct. I believe there is a system that they will accept velvet scores now in different categories, but as far as to be fair to a hard antlered animal, it would have to be removed. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. One other question just came in. On a tine that's hard to tell which is the main tine and what's the split, how do you determine which is which?
It's based off of the growth pattern. And what I mean by that, I'll pick one up. I'll find one that's got a good example. So can you see that good?
I'll get to it.
Yeah. So what I'm looking for on a split, and most of the time for our deer, it's a G2 split. So G2 is your second big tine coming off the main beam. The G2 split on this one makes one of these two non-typical. One of these points will be non-typical. So I'm going to look for the growth pattern on the backside. So I'm looking for any type of a growth pattern that will deviate from down here. So as this comes up, I see it splitting. It almost looks like to me that the main growth is all going to this point, and then that this is kind of the branch off of it. But then what I want to do also is flip over and look at the other side. Which one matches the other side? And to me, it's clear if you look across through there, this point matches this point, and it also helps this deer score because these are going to be so similar in length. So it's look at it, look at the growth, look at side to side differences, and then make that decision. Maybe I hope that helped. It's all, every rack's almost different. They're all like fingerprints, so they're different. So you have to look at each one individually. But for this one, I'd call this the split and this the non-typical point.
Yeah, that's great information. I think that has it. That's all the questions we have for now. So yeah, move forward with whatever you have for us.
Let me talk about beam length and the spread credit. If you ever look at a score sheet, you'll see. Well, let's just go straight into spread credit.
I don't think I've heard that term.
So on a score sheet, you're going to see tip to tip spread, which is the B section. And this is a Boone and Crockett typical score sheet. The B section is tip to tip spread. C section is greatest spread. And then D is inside spread of the main beams. But then you have this little section that says spread credit. So everybody that confuses people when they see spread credit. So to break it down, when you look at the score sheet, tip to tip spread does not do anything for the score. Greatest spread does not do anything for the score. Those two are taken just to identify the rack. So if your rack was stolen and somebody in 10 years, you already had it scored and you had these measurements down and somebody wanted to enter it as their own kill 10 years from now, you could go back and compare all these measurements, and you could also compare that tip to tip and the greatest spread and say, okay, these are all the same. This deer this has to be the same deer. You're using all these identifiers. They're not used in the score. They're just used to identify the rack.
Is greatest spread, is that outside spread?
That's going to be the outside spread.
Gotcha.
So really quick, let me demonstrate on this rack right here. When it says tip to tip spread, you just want to go from this point to this point, the main beam, tip to tip. and it doesn't matter how your ruler falls in there. You just want to go tip to tip. It doesn't have to be to 90 degree because this does not factor into the score. Just tip to tip right there. That's the tip to tip. We'll jump over to the next one. That's for this one. For this one, that's the tip to tip. Right there. I want to do one more tip to tip.
And this is totally for identification.
This is
purposes.
totally, but look at this one, tip to tip. So where is it? It's this right here. It's 1 inch. And you'll have some of these racks like this. Totally for identification purposes. Then we'll go back to this first one. Outside spread is usually done against a 90-degree angle, like against a wall. We just do it right here for demonstrating. But outside spread, we just want to get this greatest wherever. If it's got a kicker coming off, it doesn't matter. The widest that you can find on this whole rack. That's going to be the greatest spread. The widest point that you can find across the whole rack. Again, it doesn't factor into the score. What does factor into the score is the inside spread. Inside spread. Let's
Hey Dale, real quick on that outside spread, is that the outside spread of say the G2 and the main beam, whatever the widest point is, or just the main beam width?
anything that sticks out. So I'm gonna find one that will be a pretty good example. Let's just do this typical right here. So I'm not saying typical, but sort of a symmetrical rack. Anything that will stick outside, you find it. It doesn't matter if it's the main beam. It doesn't matter if it's sticker points. It doesn't matter if it's drop tines. Anything that sticks out, the widest point that you can find. And on this one, it could be that little sticker right here. That could come out and touch the wall and at a 90 degree and create 26, 25 inches. The widest place that you can find in that whole rack. Again, it doesn't factor into the score. It's just an identifier. So
the inside spread does factor, and is that only the main beams?
no, the inside spread is the main beams. Here's another one. Let's look at this one. Outside spread on this deer. If you look straight down on it, you're going to see this point right here sticking out, and you're going to see this funky thing sticking out over here. So if I put this up against a wall, flatten this up against a wall, pretend my arm's a wall, and I'm going to come across, I'm going to go to this little point right here. That's going to be my outside spread. It doesn't matter if it's got 20 points sticking out, the widest that you can find. It got that on outside spread?
Yes.
Okay. Now we'll go to inside spread. And this 12 pointer up here is a good example of inside spread. You want to go at a 90 degree angle to the skull cap, 90. So what I mean by 90 is 90 degree angle with this measure. And it's going to be right on the 25-inch area. And so what I do is you just kind of back and forth in this 90 degree area, 90 straight across. You don't do this. You don't go like that. You don't get any kind of spread, because sometimes you can get a wider area like that. It's got to be at a 90 degree angle to the skull cap. So probably right in there. And what I'm saying, the reason I'm showing you this one, and the reason you have to use this slide ruler is because you have to just go up and down this main beam to find that area. And it's in the middle, usually right in the middle of the main beam is where you're going to find it. So I'm going to call it, I'm not even going to look at it. I'm going to call that 25 inches inside. It's 25 inches is the spread. So on the sheet, that's what I'm going to put down for the spread. But we're going to call these main beams. I've measured the main beams. Both main beams are 24.5 inches. The spread, this is important, the spread cannot be more than the length of the main beams. That's where you come into spread credit. That's confusing to a lot of people. So what that's doing is some racks go out like this and don't curve in. And as they go out, they may be 23 inches long on the main beam, but what that creates is a really wide rack, 27 inches wide. Those don't get credit for that width. They need to do a symmetrical kind of a turn. So spread credit means you only get credit for your longest main beam. You don't get credit for the spread if your spread is wider than the main beams. So that's important. That's confusing to a lot of people. Anybody have any questions on that? Because that's a very common question. Spread credit. That's the reason they have that little box to spread credit, because they want to know, is the spread wider than the main beams?
That's interesting. No questions right now, but that's
And here's an example of what I was talking about. This angled rack for this one, you know, you don't want to do it. You don't want to do this to get the spread. You want to do this 90-degree angle to the skull cap, 90, and come in here and get the spread. This will give you a little bit wider, but that'd be incorrect. This is correct. 90-degree angle.
So, hey Dale, another question just came in. So the credit doesn't count towards your gross score?
The spread credit does. If you have to use spread credit, if that's what you have to use as your spread, the spread credit, that's what goes to your score.
So basically, if the spread is wider than your main beams are long, then you only get to use the length
You get
of the
to use
main
the
beam.
longest main beam as your spread. That's the spread credit. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't count against you.
It doesn't, but it's trying to keep those that do this
Right.
from gaining a bunch of points of inches rather than this.
Right.
Yeah. I hope that answered that question, because it doesn't happen often. It's rare that we get a rack that does that, but this is one that's right on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 25-inch-ish beam and a 25-inch wide rack.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
go ahead.
what would be the next measurement outside of inside spread?
From inside spread, outside spread, and tip to tip, the next thing we would go to would be main beam spread, or main beam length.
Oh.
The main beam length. Yeah, main beam spread is something different. So if I'm going to score a deer and I want to know what the main beam is, I get a lot of questions on this. Where do I start the cable on the main beam? What's the area? So this one right here will be just as easy as any. So on these cables, I'm just trying to see if you can see that really good.
Mm-hmm. Let me hold it.
Yeah, if you can hold it right there, and on these cables, they always have this little clip on the end of it right there. And you're looking, sometimes you don't have the eye socket, but this one has the eye socket on it. And I'm looking right behind the eye socket, kind of offset of center, but I'm hooking that cable somewhere right behind the eye socket. And when I hook it in, I want to lay it down on the main beam, and I want to go the entire length on the outside edge and just follow the curve of the main beam. About midway along the main beam, just follow the curve. Just roll it towards you. Follow the curve, and let's shuffle back a little bit, and I'm gonna grab a. And that's why we have these little hooks. And you hook it in.
And that's your length.
Take this length, put it down on your ruler, and hook it in. And so that is going to be 23. It's all in eighths. So 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. It's in between 3 and 4/8. See right there, right in the middle. So if it was just below that 16th, we would round down. I'm going to call it just above that 16th, so we're going to round up one. So it's going to be 23 and 4/8 is going to be that beam length.
So
23 and
it was
4/8.
slightly above the
If
3/8.
it's slightly above, if it falls in the middle, you round up or down depending on how far it is.
Okay.
Yeah. This area here is the burr of the antler, that rough area. It'll start right behind the eye socket, right at the burr, right there. I'm going to hook it in right there, and I'm going to start going around behind. And I'm going to follow the main beam around. And some of these things will roll. As they roll, you keep following that roll. If it rolls in, if it rolls out, you follow the main beam. And I'll show you, I guess, disclaimer. So many racks are so different. They're all definitely unique that when I talk about certain things, a roll of a rack, a roll of a main beam, I've got one I'll show you in a minute. The main beam actually comes around and rolls forward. I've got some more racks that the main beam rolls backwards. So it's just, when you get your hands on a rack, it's just however it scores or however it grows. It's hard to look at one in pictures, or if someone popped one up on the screen right now, without it being in my hands, it's really hard to say how I would score it. I want to see it. I want to have it in my hands and say, this is how I would score it. So bear with me when we show you some of these things. I'll think of one. I've got one in mind right here in a minute that the rack rolls this way. And I'm going to go grab it right now and I'll bring it over. So this deer, the main beam, I'm going to show you, if you can see, I'm going to tilt it. There we go. So the main beam, I'm going to start the main beam right behind the eye socket there in that area, come right behind it. I'm going to hook it in. As I hook it in, I'm going to run that cable right around the back of it and watch this thing roll as I follow my finger and watch this rack main beam roll. This is how the cable's going to go. Just like that. It's going to roll under and out. Just like that on both sides. So if I turn it to this side, watch how this cable is going to roll. There's the eye socket. I'm going to hook it in there. I'm going to run that cable right around the main beam, keeping it on the outside edge of the main beam, and then watch this main beam turn under. Like that. Not like that. Like that.
How do you know it turns under?
I can just look at the rack and tell.
Okay.
It's just, I've seen enough of them that some racks do that. And some of them will turn under like that, but some will turn out the other way. It just depends on the rack.
You can really tell when you hold it up like that, how it turns. When you hold it straight up to the camera, you can really see that point turning. So
here's another one. I'm gonna do the same thing. Is it easy to see it with my finger on there like that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So again, here's the eye socket. I'm going to go right behind the eye socket. I'm going to hook it in right there. I'm going to lay the cable on this main beam, and I'm going to start laying it down and holding it, keeping it on the middle of the main beam. You can almost see a line in there. Main beam, main beam. So what's going to happen out here? I'm just going to follow this main beam as it turns down to the tip right there. That's the main beam on this side. Flip it over. The main beam on this side, again, the eye socket, hook it in. I'm going to come right around behind it. Just follow right across this area that's all messed up, but it's just fine. Just go right across it. Keep it in the middle. Go all the way to the tip. Those side to side was different. One side turns down and one side is normal. So that gets your main beams. And like I say, the typicals and non-typicals are all scored the same. You really don't get into scoring differently in the two different categories until you get to drop time and splits and kickers. But you want to find the main frame within every rack. So every rack is going to have some type of a typical frame in there.
I remember back with the Tucker buck, that was difficult to find that main frame, wasn't it?
When I looked at it, I finally came up with a 5x5, a 10-point frame in there. I think that's what it was. And within those 10 points, there were all these points coming off of it. So once you found that 10-point frame, it was easy to score that frame and then score all the typical off of it. But finding the typical frame is the main thing. So I have this question. The reason I brought this deer, what about this point right here? So sometimes we get deer with double main beams on one side. So what do you do with those? A double main beam means find the two similar beams. So decide what your left beam is going to be, decide what your right beam is going to be. Then that double main beam, whichever one is the odd one, whatever you decide is the odd beam, that's going to be a non-typical point. That's going to add to your gross and to your net score on a non-typical rack. So this would just be added to the rack later on. So this is a double main beam. If this beam came around and had points on it, you want to find the one that matches the other side, that's more equally suited to the other side, and call it your main beam, and then call this one the non-typical stuff. So again, let me grab another one that has that similar. This is sort of a double main beam, it's crazy rack. But when I look at this rack, I see a left main beam, a right main beam, side to side, similar. There's a similar 8-point rack in there, but this thing right here at the bottom, all of this stuff is an extra beam, an extra main beam that comes off and has points on it, which is rare, but you see it. This would all be added to the non-typical score, non-typical point.
So if I'm scoring a typical, I got my inside spread, my beam length, and then you do your circumference. Each side gets 4.
Each side gets 4. And then I'm going to do the point length, all the lengths of the points, the typical points.
Now that a lot of people ask me that. Where do I measure from?
Okay.
And
we will let's just.
You may not have been ready for that.
No, no, we're at that point. So I'll just use. Let me find a good one that we can flip over.
Because I'm going to give myself every benefit of the doubt.
I'm going to get this one and we'll bring it over to the table.
All right.
This one will be easy one to lay down and show everybody. And actually, probably without that, all that paper stuff, we'll lay it right here. So most racks, you want to score lengths based on how the points grow. So the length of this point, this G2, is probably going to get a longer length on it, longer a measurement from the outside. So if I measure from here to here, that curve over is going to give it a longer length than if I measure from here to here. You want to give it the longest length you can give it. So if a brow tine curves over like this, you want to measure over the curve.
Outside of the curve.
Over the curve, yeah. If it curls forward, you want to measure over the top of it. If it curls back, you want to measure over the back of it. So you want to get the longest measurement. I use this not as much as I did when I first started because it's time consuming, but the easiest way to make sure you're getting the correct starting point is to put a piece of tape on it. And you don't mark on the antler, you just put a piece of tape down. And what that allows you to do, a lot of people do this before they even start scoring. If I've got a big deer and I know it's going to make Boone and Crockett, and I want to make sure I get it for sure right, I will tape it like this, because this tape will come off. Use a pencil, and you want to use a cable. So to measure a point, the typical points coming off a beam, I want to act like I'm cutting the point off, and I'm going to take this cable and I'm going to put it along the main beam and drop it on top of the beam on both sides of that point. So you can see right there, I've got the cable on both sides. I want to take this pencil and I want to mark under the cable, under it. That gives me a starting point.
And you're holding the cable tight, right?
And I'm holding the cable tight. And the same thing on the next point. Lay it in there, hold it tight, and act like you're cutting the point off of the main beam. So that if you looked at that and you sawed it off, you just have the main beam smooth. That's your starting point for measuring.
Real quick, Dale, the G1 is the same thing as a brow tine, correct?
Correct. And that's all its reason it's called a G point is that's how it fell on the score sheet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G happens to be where the points start. Yeah. So from here, how I want to measure this one, I want to measure on the outside curve. I've got a starting point. I want to lay it there, start right in the middle of the point. I'm pressing down to hold the cable, follow the length of the point, come over and hook my tool in and just make sure I'm right at the tip. I may want to move it up or down depending on where I'm at, but I feel like that's the spot. And I'm going to take this back over to our yardstick. And it is going to be 11 and 2/8. Definitely in the eighths. 11 and 2/8, right on the dot. So I'd put that down. I'd measure the next one, the G3. Measuring the brow point the same way. So gross on these animals, on these racks. If this one is 11 and 2/8, and I come over here and measure this one at 12, you're going to have a 6/8 inch deduction for the net score. Net is what goes in the books. So there's your deduction on a typical side-to-side deductions.
So the difference between the two is
matching
the
points,
deduction.
that's the deduction.
Right.
Whatever the difference is between the two matching points is the deduction. So the difference between your G1s, deduction. Difference in G2s, deduction. Difference in G3s, deduction. Difference in main beam, deduction. Difference in circumference measurements, side to side, deduction. Difference in H1, H2, H3, H4, deductions. That is the net score.
And that's on a typical rack.
That's on a typical rack.
What about those non-typicals? Because
the non-typical, you score it the exact same way. Pretend that your non-typical rack is a typical rack.
mm-hmm.
You take those deductions just like you would a typical rack, but when you get finished with all those side-to-side deductions, you add on all the non-typical growth. The non-typical growth adds to your score. You don't deduct it.
Okay.
And we'll go through a couple of those here in a minute. But as far as a typical rack, this is what most people in Tennessee are going to see. Something like this, a big deer, with our system, with our herd, with our 2-buck limit, a lot of these deer are showing up, a lot. So when we get asked to score places, we have these deer show up. Pretty easy to score. So you can score one of these yourself because it's simple. The most difficult part would be where is the H4 measurement, the H4 circumference. And on this deer, we'll just go to this side right here. We talked about every deer has to get 4 circumference measurements. The first one is going to be between the burr and the G1, so the burr and the brow, and it's going to be the smallest area. So I'm going to see if this thing will sit right there. I'm going to grab my tape, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Smallest area. Let me see if it'll roll over and just sit like that. Right there. This area right here, the smallest area I can find. I'm going to wrap my tape. And I'm going to pull it around. And I'm going to start pulling it tight. Right there, I'm looking at 4 3/8. If you can see that. 4 3/8 right there. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to move on up. There's over 4 and 4. There's over 4 and 4. There's 4 and 6. And then I get to the brow tine, and it's going to keep making it getting bigger. So I want to go back down. Right in here is a small area. 4 and 3 is the smallest that I've gotten to so far. There's just under 4 and 3, but it's still over closer to the 4 and 3. So the circumference for that one will be 4 3/8. Then I'm going to go to the H2 between the brow and the G2. I want to get the smallest that I can place that I can find in there. There is going to be right at 3 5/8. There's the 4, there's the 5. Not quite. There's definitely a 3 5/8. I'm going to keep moving up. It's getting a little bit smaller, but it's still, there's 3 4/8. So between the G1 and G2, I'm going to say 3 4/8. H3 between the G2 and the G3. Right here, I'm getting right at 3 3/8, but it's getting smaller. It's getting closer to 3 2. And the reason I say it's closer right there to 3 and 2 than it is to 3 and 3. It's just under the midway mark. So I'm going to go with 3 and 2/8 right there. Now, H4 has to be somewhere between this area. It has to get 4 circumference measurements. What you do, and this is what the tape is for. You take your masking tape, put a piece right below that point, and you're going to basically line up the midline of that point. So the midline is going to be somewhere right in here, right in the middle of that point. And what you want to do is measure. It's easier with a cable. I have to get a circumference somewhere in this mid area, and it's halfway between this point and the tip. The circumference is going to be. So I want to lay my cable there, measure this distance, hook this little thing on the tip. I'm going to see how far that is. So it's showing 10 and 2/8. So half of that, 5 and 1/8. So what I want to do is come back to this point and go 5 and 1/8 from that line. 3, 4, 5, and 1/8 is right there. You can see that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm marking that. Usually I would take a piece of tape and put right there so I know that line. I've got it visually marked as right there. I'm going to slide this ruler around and pull it tight and get my H4, which is going to be 2 and 4/8. 2 and 4/8. So that'll be your H4 measurement.
So all of your H measurements are the smallest area except for H4. H4 is the distance dead center.
If it's an 8-pointer.
If it's an 8-pointer.
Or smaller.
I got you.
If it's an 8-point frame. So if you got a 10-pointer, it's easy because it's the smallest point between the G3 and the G4.
Mm-hmm.
But
if it's a 6-point,
a 6-point,
it's the middle one, and you get to count it twice.
Same thing, you add it 2 times.
Gotcha.
You don't add it 2 times, but you put it down 2 times.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Dale,
that-
a couple questions coming in. So when measuring a point, if it falls between the eighths, does it round up or round down? Just to clarify.
If it falls between the 8s,
Whichever one is closest.
whichever one it's closest to, which is the way you round it. If it falls dead in the middle, round up. If it falls just below it, round down.
Okay. All right. So let me see what this next question is. No matter how many points you take, 4 measurements, even if it's from a 10-point to a spike, you get 4 circumference measurements.
Correct. One more time on that one,
If
just
it
to make
was
sure.
a spike, say if it was a spike or something like that, how would you get 4 circumference?
You're not getting me to come out to score a spike. But it'd have to be a gigantic. It's going to get 4 circumferences. So you would just measure from the burr to the tip and go halfway, and then that would be your 4 circumferences.
Okay. All right. So that halfway point would be times 4.
Put that down 4 times.
4 times.
Yeah.
So a 4-pointer would be similar.
A 4-pointer, you'd go between the burr and the first point and get your first one,
The smallest.
and then get the smallest there, and then from the G2 to the tip, we'll go 3 times.
Mark thought that was funny that you weren't going to come out to score a spike. He laughed.
No, I'm not scoring a spike. I mean, if it's a giant, maybe.
It'd have to be one heck of a.
I killed the biggest 6-pointer I've ever killed in my life this year, and he was an old deer. But he would be one of those where I would do a circumference measurement from the G2 to the tip, and it would be 2 times on one side, 2 times on the other. But he's like a 120-inch 6-pointer.
Wow.
But just a massive old deer. That probably the biggest one I'll ever take.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay right here for a second.
I'm going to bring this stuff to you. So another example of what we're talking about is this right here. So this point, H1 is going to be the smallest point between the burr and the brow tine. So the smallest that I can find here, H1, H2 is going to be the smallest point between the brow and the G2. So smallest point right here. And then the H3 is going to be, draw that line right here, measure this distance, come back halfway. H3 and H4 is going to be somewhere right there. The other side is going to be H1, H2, H3. But then again, you have to find that middle point and go from there to the tip, go halfway for H4.
And for that, it would be somewhere right in here.
You'd come right down and find that line. Yep.
Okay.
And then measure from there over. Yeah. And then on this point, we talked about this earlier. What is the main beam? What's the G2 on this deer? Well, when I look at this, I see a main beam. That line right there tells me that's the main point. This is an offshoot, and I would cut that off by using my cable. I'd lay a line right there, act like I'm cutting that point off, draw a line, start my measurement from there out, and that would be a non-typical point.
So you're looking at this, and you're not saying main beam, but the main point.
The main tine coming off of this. Yeah.
So you match it up to the opposite side.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one and this one. Yeah. Didn't have a G3. It threw a point up here.
Gotcha.
This deer died of EHD. I'm pretty sure I found it by a little pond. But old deer, we had a lot of those die this year around my area anyway. But that one was a 2007 EHD.
Oh,
we had that huge
back
kill.
in the big day.
Yeah, we had to kill.
Yeah.
So here's another deer. Very symmetrical rack. So am I going to score this deer as a typical or as a non-typical? I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say it's got a very symmetrical frame. It's got little tiny short kickers coming off of it, abnormal points. But look how they're both the same on both sides. So is that a typical? Because are those typical points?
They're not typical points.
But they are matching points.
But they match.
They match. They are abnormal. They're not typical points. So these would be deductions on this typical frame. These two would probably be an inch long and be a deduction. But it's overall a typical 10-point frame. Very typical, very symmetrical, heavy, but these little points are deductions on that typical frame. Even though they look symmetrical, they're deductions because they're not straight up.
So if I'm just scoring it for me, I can score it either way. I can go typical or non-typical and just see what I get.
If you're scoring it for you, what you want to know is the gross score. You're just going to add up the total inches on his head. That's what I want to know.
I want to know how much bones up there.
What's he got on his head? Yeah. And that's what a lot of people just want to know, the gross score. And I will give them the gross score a lot of times, and don't do that. I don't do the net sometimes if it's not going to make the registry.
Right.
So I'll give them the gross, and that's what they tell their buddies. That's what they shot.
Yeah.
This is a good question for this point. So on a split, does it really matter which is the main beam and which is the split, since it'll be non-typical anyway, and all the score will count?
You want to make sure the main tine matches the other side. So if one side has a split and one side doesn't, you want to make those the G2s, you want to make them similar in length. So if you pick the wrong split, it may make the left side shorter, so then you've got a deduction. It may make it longer. You want to pick the two that, of course, the growth pattern is what you look at also, but you want to pick the two that are similar to each other.
So on a non-typical, there are deductions?
Yes, because you're finding the typical frame first.
Okay.
They've all got a typical frame in there. And I will find one and show you what I'm talking about.
So if I've got a typical frame with a couple kickers, you're still going to get deductions if you're 1/8 inch off or 1/2 inch off. And then you add in the non-typical stuff.
To make its net non-typical score. Yeah.
But you're not adding back in the deductions.
You don't add in the deductions for the typical frame. I know it's all like Chinese. Like as far as if you not sit down and study the score sheet, it is difficult because when I talk about the deductions on a typical rack, you can get that. When I talk about the deductions on a non-typical rack, on the typical frame, it starts to get into, what are you talking about? What do you mean? The typical deductions on a non-typical rack.
Yeah, because I just want to score it
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
And then
And just like this one, okay, this is a non-typical rack. You look at this and you're like, oh, there's no symmetry whatsoever. Yeah, there is. This thing has got symmetry. Brow tine, similar. G2, G2, similar. G3, for sure, this is a G3. I know this is a G3. Where's the G3 over here? Well, I don't know. So if I look at it across the whole thing, yeah, I'm seeing this curve coming out and this curve coming out. So I'm going to say this one and this one are the G3s. I'm going to say this one's the non-typical point. So I'm going to cut it off right there, measure it, put it in the non-typical category, and then it'll add back in later on.
Okay.
And then it's got a G4, but over here, it tried to grow one. It just didn't quite get there. So it's a typical rack, typical frame, 5 by 4. Then you've got a non-typical point here that will be added in. And you've got this big drop time that'll be added back in. You got a little point right there that'll be added back in. So every rack has a typical frame within it, whether it's typical or non-typical.
And when we're scoring and we're talking about these numbers and the deductions, this is the way this method was designed, and everyone that's been entered has been scored the same exact way.
Yeah.
So
Boone and Crockett is all based on symmetry. Symmetry, side to side, the same, side to side. Just like this one. I mean, if we really look hard at this deer, where's the typical frame in this deer? It's got stuff going on here. It's got stuff going on in the back. It's got some stickers. It's got drops. It's got almost like a double beam up here. So where's the typical frame? And when I look at it, here's the G1s. They come up and almost touch. The brows are right here. These are similar. G2 right here. This one's going to match it. These two right here. So when I get to G3, where's my G3? If I look at this thing, I say G3 for sure over here. Then I come over here and I'm like, where's the G3 over here? So if I'm scoring it, I'm probably going to match this one. And it's short. So there's a deduction. It's really short to this one. But this, to me, without really studying it hard, it looks like a G3. And then, okay, is this a G4? It sort of looks like the rack turns in and creates that almost a crab claw look. And this one could be a G4. It almost turns in, and this is the main beam. So within this rack, you could almost call this a 5 by 5 frame, 5 by 5 typical. Then you take side to side deductions. Then you add on all this other stuff. Add it up, throw it in. But they're all different. I mean, it's if I look at this one, by the way, this one was killed in Clarksville behind a guy's house in the middle of town before the a little before season opened. Just a little bit before it opened. But so where, if I look at this, it's a typical rack, but here's the G1 on this side for sure. Which one of these two matches this one the best? Which one is going to be the brow?
I'm saying that one in the back. But it's hard for me to say.
So when I'm looking at it, I want to look at the back of it too.
Oh, well, no, now.
So now you look at the back and you're like, it almost looks like it's a separate thing in there growing out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw these two together. And if you just move this one up the base a little bit, this one is going to be about the same length as this one because it's a little shorter. See how? But if you move it up the base, it's going to be about the same. And this one's going to be a non-typical point. G2, G3, G2, G3. Little non-typical points if they measure. Okay, where's your circumference going to be on this one? How do you get the circumference on this area right here? The circumference has to be between what you call the brow point and the burr. So circumference for this one is going to be a big circumference right around the bottom right there. It's going to be really big, and it's going to be a lot bigger than this side, so it's going to be a deduction. Whatever the difference right there will be a deduction.
Okay.
Real quick, Dale, how many typical racks do you usually see versus non-typical these days?
Typical are more common, but as a deer, as they get older, like this deer is sort of young, but he's starting to, he was, I'm going to say he was a 3.5-year-old deer. He's starting to throw some points out, non-typical stuff. So as they get older, if they have the ability to throw some non-typical stuff, they will as they get older. But some deer will never, they'll just never grow it. They'll always have a typical rack. But some of them are going to throw kickers and stickers out like this the older they get. But we're still seeing more typical racks than anything. This little deer right here was young, but look at the potential of stickers. On the G2, 2 stickers coming out on this side, 3 stickers on the other side. They match, but they're non-typical points. This deer, had it gotten quite a bit older, these things would have popped out a little bit bigger. He has ridges on this G3. There would have been some points here, just like they're starting to grow over here on this side. So this deer had potential to throw a whole bunch of stickers on the G2s and the 3s.
So does dry time influence the net score on a hard bone deer versus one the velvet has been removed from?
Okay, think of it kind of like this. Well, I'll just use this deer for example. This deer, drying time, if they have velvet on their antlers, the antlers are porous inside, porous with probably some blood flow in them still. As they harden inside, they get solid and the blood comes out of it and it contracts and they do shrink a little bit. So, but by the time our velvet season opens, the amount of shrinkage from the velvet, it could be quite a bit depending on, like say, circumference measurements or length measurements, because the velvet's going to add to it. But a regular hard antler deer, when you shoot it, when this deer was shot, when I measured this deer for the first time, it was 25 1/8 inside, 25 1/8. After a 60-day drying period, it was around 25, just under 25. So they will shrink a little bit, but not much. Whenever people worry about shrinkage, it's not much to worry about. It doesn't shrink that much. Now, going from velvet to taking velvet off, or from velvet straight into hard antler, yeah, it may a little bit more than normal. But a hard antler deer, when you shoot it and you wait 60 days for a drying period, it doesn't change the score that much. Kind of the progression of scoring a deer. You want to get your spread, inside spread. You want to get your tip to tip, your outside spread. You want to get your beam lengths. And if you just go down the sheet, the score sheet, it kind of is, there's a progression down the score sheet. Beam lengths, then you want to get your G1, which is your brow, G2, G3, G4, and so on, if there's however many typical points it has coming up. So when you get those, then you want to go to your H measurements, because they're the next in progression on your sheet, H1, H2, H3, H4. Once you get those, then if you want to go back and find all your non-typical points and add them to the score sheet, all the non-typical points normally go up to the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner of your score sheet. If it's a typical rack, those non-typical points will be a deduction in the final score. If it's a non-typical rack, all those non-typical points will be an addition in the final score. So that's the overall scoring score sheets of how they work. And a lot of like Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young, I know if you go online, I think for sure Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett also, they have, you can enter the 8s and it'll add it up for you. I have a calculator that will add fractions that I use. That's my go-to. I mean, I can do it in my head because I've done so many of them, and then they're in 8s, but I have made mistakes doing it in my head, and I've sent it off to Boone and Crockett, and they'll send it back and say, oh, you're 2 8s off, and they'll show me the discrepancy where I didn't rush it, I just didn't check myself. So with that, I will say, to score a deer and to score it right and to make sure it's correct, it could take an hour easily on any deer to make sure it's correct. It could take an hour and a half depending on if it's a really difficult, non-typical. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is we get a lot of requests to score deer. Well, a lot of times it comes about during the hunting season when people shoot one or they get it back from the taxidermist. Let's say they've had it at the taxidermist all summer and all of a sudden they get it back in September, October. That's a busy time for us, and it's hard for us to come score deer at that time because we're breaking away from other stuff. There's not that many official scores in the state. We do have people that are certified to score for the state registry, scattered all over the state. But a lot of times when people call to ask, it's during the hunting season. Hey, come score my deer. Green score, we get asked to green score a lot of deer. You're going, let's say if it's an hour travel time to get there, and then it's an hour to score the deer, and an hour travel time to come back, you're 3 hours green scoring a deer that you're going to have to score again later on after it dries. So, be patient with us. If you call us and you can't get us to get a score right now, we'll hopefully get some scoring opportunities set up around the state. Some times where we can get a lot of people in. Hopefully after this COVID, we'll get taken care of. But we can get into back into a.
You had one planned, didn't you?
Oh, we had one planned. We usually have one in Clarksville in January up there, but I'm going to assume it's going to be canceled because people are just kind of scared to do that type of activity right now. Right. We usually have one in Adams, but we probably will wait until we get through this COVID and see what happens. Not using it as an excuse. I want to score them. I like to score them. Yeah. But the hunting seasons are difficult for us to do it. And then with what's going on right now, it's kind of difficult.
Hey, one question came in. Let's say a rack has a G4 that's 1 4/8 inch on one side, and the other G4 is only 7/8 of an inch. So it doesn't really count as a point. Is correct. The higher 1 4/8 inch the deduction, or is just the 5/8 the deduction?
It has to be a 1 inch point to count, to be scored. And that 1 inch point has to be longer than it is wide. So if you got a 1 inch bump that sticks up and it's a really wide bump, but it's not a long point. So it's 1 inch, let's say it's 1 inch tall or 1.5 inches tall, but it's 2 inches wide, that won't count. It's got to be an inch long and it has to be longer than it is wide. So in that case, the right side, whatever side has the 1 4/8, that would be a deduction on the typical frame of that rack. Because the 7/8 wouldn't count anyway.
Gotcha. Okay.
Here's an example, kind of what we're talking about. Even though there's not a point, this is a typical 9, and he's got a G1, G2, G3, G4, G1, G2, G3, no G4. So on the typical frame, this G4 would be a deduction because he doesn't have a match over here. If he had a bump right there, a little bump, it still wouldn't count unless it was an inch long.
Now, if you scored that non-typical, would you get to add that back in or no?
No, because it falls on the typical frame,
okay,
and it doesn't have a match over here. It would be a deduction.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now you could count it in your gross score.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Gross means what it grew on its head.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes we get points that are outside and inside rows, double rows. Typically, the outside row is the typical row of points. So, but in this case, there's an outside point right here that comes up off of this beam. This rack turns in. The main beam turns in. This point right here is going to be the non-typical point. That would just be a non-typical point that does not match anything else on that rack. And it's kind of a double row. Double rows are pretty common. Double rows are usually the outside row will be the row you count. That's another common one. I'm going to just hold this up because I know we've held it up already before. But just even this rack right here, this little rack right here, H1, you can see there's a brow tine right there. That brow tine, this brow tine is not an inch long, but you know where the brow tine's at. So your H1 is going to be between the tiny little brow tine that doesn't count, H1, and then the H2 is going to be between that little brow tine and the G2, H2, H3, and then the H4 will be between the tip and the G3, right there, halfway. Same thing on the other side. Neither one of those brows would count.
Neither one would count.
Neither one. I don't think that's going to be an inch either.
So, but you.
But
would still-
you know where it's at. You know where the brow is, so you can count the H1s.
Okay.
And I'll show you another example of that. Broken points. Okay, H1 measurement. This brow is broken. It doesn't count, but you know where the brow's at. So your H1 is going to be between where the broken brow is and the burr. So the smallest point between here and there, and then the small H2 is the smallest point between that break and the G2, H3, and H4. So a broken point, if you know where it was at, or if it shows, or if there's a bump there that shows where it was trying to grow, you can still get your H measurements in between it. That's pretty common.
Yeah.
Broken points. Broken points, if this point was broken right there and it didn't count in the score, but you still knew where the G2 was at, you would still go on either side of it to get your H measurement.
Smallest point
Yeah.
in between.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So we've already talked about this one, the
Mhm.
main thing. Here's a difficult racks to score are these with what we call crown points. And with this deer, I never saw this deer live, but this is an old deer. And the reason I say that is the way the rack grows. But Barry, if you hold this one, notice how light it is. And then hold this one.
Oh, yeah.
So it's almost like old people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Porous bones.
Yeah.
This is very porous, lightweight. This is dense,
Yep.
heavy. This deer was real healthy. This deer was older, more porous rack. So anyway, what I want to show you about is these crown points. Those are difficult, very difficult to score, but I'm rolling it so I can see it, what I'm talking about. This is your G2. This whole point's your G2. This point right here is a non-typical point. But when you would measure this point, you'd go down into this webbing. You go down in there. You don't cut it off out here. You go deep into the webbing and find where it attaches to this main tine coming up. And you score it from down in there out. They're difficult, but the webbing creates problems, and webbing created problems for the Tucker buck. Lots of webbing. That's the reason the Tucker buck went up another 3 inches from the time we finished it till the panel scored it because of the webbing.
Which was pretty amazing because when you scored one side, you came up with 150 inches on one side.
Yeah.
I mean, so to
Yeah.
be that close to the final score was.
I threw this in because I asked this question a few minutes ago. So is this a typical rack or non-typical? And so you look at it and you're saying it's got 5 points sticking up, very typical, but it also has these stickers coming off the G2 that are matching stickers, but those are non-typical points.
Yeah.
They don't come off the main beam.
But if I shot that with a bow, I could have it scored either way.
It would make Pope and Young easy, but it would not make Boone and Crockett
Right.
typical because it's not quite where it needs to be.
But Pope and Young, I could call it typical or
You
non-typical.
could make it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because those non-typical points.
Yeah.
Possible. Yeah.
I guess the important thing to know about this scoring system is it's equal across the whole board.
It's
Everything is scored the same, even though deductions are taken for typical and non-typical. Every animal that's ever been entered in those books, and even in our Tennessee Deer Registry, is measured
the same system. The same system. So yeah, with that, when we score a deer, we're not using different systems. We're always using the same system to compare. So we don't switch to Buckmaster system or any other kind of different system. Their systems are their systems, but
Right.
our state follows the Boone and Crockett regulation guidelines. Again, I just brought this over because of webbing. This one has some webbing. These are the most difficult, that webbing that goes down in there. It's almost like I could measure my fingers, but if I put webbing between my fingers, where would I measure down to? That's the difficulty with webbing.
Is this one where you're talking here? You see this? Is it all the way down here, or is it
I would lay it
across
I would-
there?
it's got a lot of mass to it. I would lay it right in there and cut it off right through there.
Okay.
Yeah, and the same thing here, right through there. And cut this one off. Same thing here.
Okay.
Here's a fun question, Dale.
Difficult, depending on the animal, the rack. Typicals are straightforward.
Gotcha.
Here's a fun question from Robert. I shoot a deer and it hits the ground and one side falls off. One side of the rack falls off. Can it still be counted for Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young if I recover it?
Used to, they would not allow racks that had broken or that were damaged. But let's say in 2000, I'm gonna say 2015-ish, somewhere in there, they started to allow racks that had been broken. If you had the pieces to put them back together, and you could put them back together firmly and in the correct spot, they started allowing those to be entered. So with that, if it broke off, if you could put it back in the exact spot. Now, with a shed like that, I'm trying to think about a shed. I'd have to research it. I'm not sure about a shed because it would be considered a shed at that point. But if it broke and the actual antler was still attached to the skull plate, and you could take the broken piece and put it back on the other broken piece, they would accept that.
That's a good question. That's good. Anything else, Barry, from your point of view there? You got a lot to choose from to talk about.
I think I'm going hunting in the morning.
When we did the class in 2003, I didn't understand the logistics issues with bringing all these racks from Missoula, Montana, for us to learn to score. They brought everything. So when we were certified to score, we were certified to score on everything big game in North America. And they had to ship huge shipments to Nashville. And then they brought those crates over to Montgomery Bell State Park. And we were there for 3 or 4 days and we studied these things. And then they have to load all that stuff back up and take it out. I just came for white-tailed deer and I brought, 20 racks and a bunch of sheds. But logistically, for me to get all this stuff together, it's not just run down here and take care of it. So I try to get things that people would commonly see in this area and it may have questions about.
This one, I guess the important thing with measuring your points, and it doesn't matter, like this almost has a palmation, look to it, but you're still measuring you're stretching your line across the top
Run
of the
that
rack
cable across the top and mark under the bottom.
Mark under the bottom, and that's your time. That
would be your, and then how do I get my beam length from here to the tip with all this stuff in the middle? You just kind of go around it. If it's in your way, just go around it with your cable. Keep going. Or go just under it. You just go around it. Yeah. The shortest length distance around it.
This one actually,
you can see right in the center of it.
Yeah. Just kind of goes.
They're all different. Like I said, they're like fingerprints. They're all so different that it'd be difficult if somebody put up a rack on the screen right now and said, tell me how to score this one. I could maybe look at it and give you an idea, but if it had non-typical stuff coming out of it, it would be difficult without having it in my hands.
All right. Quick question. Deer on the hoof. Can you visually look at
Pretty
one
quick.
and go, that's what
Pretty
it's going
quick.
to be?
Yeah. And then also I get this question. Pretty quick, I can do one pretty good. But I get this question. I've got a shed. If you get a shed, that's one that's fell off of an animal and you find it, what did it score? The easiest way to do that is to add up what that shed, inches on that shed, just double it. Just imagine the other side was the exact same thing. And then take that shed and measure over to where you think it would be halfway between on the spread. So if you just set it on a table, just go an inch or two past where it's sitting on the table, come straight up and measure into the curve, and that gives you half of the spread. Double that, and then double the actual rack, and that'll give you pretty close to what that deer is going to score, just by finding a shed.
So you can go out and kind of guesstimate
On
what you've got on your property.
Yeah.
Okay. Good deal.
So you've had, you said 6 point this year was a pretty good score deer for you. Was that little one your first deer, or was that your biggest to date until that 6 point? No.
Hey, when we grew up, when we were at 11 bucks, this was a trophy. In the 80s, this was a trophy.
So
you just didn't see much
sticking up.
We were at 11 bucks in the 80s, 11 buck limit, and in the 90s, early 90s, and in 1998 when we went to $2, and we went back to $3 in 1999, and then in 2015 we went back to $2. So it is showing. I'm seeing some old deer. People pass this. People are passing this stuff.
This is normal at a check station.
Yeah, all day.
I mean, it's not that the $2 limit is a bad thing, because
No,
it is really growing bigger deer, and because of it, you're right. People are passing
that stuff.
They're like, I know there's something bigger. So it is really.
I mean, you think about this deer as a year. This is a 1.5 year old deer. To have an 8 point frame already on him at a 1.5 years, this deer had potential.
Yeah.
But with $2, take what you want. Want to shoot that? That's your choice.
Right.
You got 2 to take, and then depending on where you live in the state, unlimited doe, just about.
That's right.
Well, I was joking with you, Dale, but what's your personal best? What are you setting at right now? I know you killed a lot of big deer. You're a great deer hunter.
My personal best gross would be about right at 170, 168, 170 gross. I've not shot anything over 170 gross, and I'm in a great place for it. You know, I live in a great place for it. I just haven't come across one yet.
Mine's about 115, but I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I think mine's probably close to 110, 115, probably right there with you, Barry. So, you know.
Where you live in the state. I live in Montgomery County, and statistically over the years, even when I was in grade school, I tell people this, Montgomery County had the most 10 point and more, 10 points, 11 points, 12 points, had more every year than any other county in the state, consistently every year. It still does. Even with all the development, it's still growing good quality deer up there. It just takes them less time to get to 8, 10, 12 points up there as compared to other places in the state.
Well, I mean, I don't know what else to add.
Anything else you're thinking of? I mean, we kind of, we didn't go down a score sheet and just do a score sheet. That'd probably be, I mean, this may have been boring for some other people, but that would have been probably tough to just sit and watch me put numbers on a score sheet. But like I say, you can score on your own and plug those numbers into a Boone and Crockett website or Pope and Young website, and it'll calculate the numbers for you. It wouldn't be something you could submit. You would still have to get a score, an official score, to score it and submit it on an official sheet because they're going to put their score number down there and then submit it. But always, if you submit one, you need to always follow the directions on the sheet. I'll get one back and it'll say the trophy owner didn't submit a left side picture or a right side picture or a front on picture. And if you don't submit exactly the way they say do it, they'll send it back. They will not enter it into the records book. So follow the directions. submit what they need, and they'll go through.
But with what you've seen tonight, you can certainly take a tape measure and a carpenter's ruler and what else was that?
Cable.
A cable,
That's
and
it.
you can measure
Your own.
pretty
yeah.
close to what your deer is going to measure gross. You can do the deductions if you'd like, and see what he would actually score, and be able to enter into our registry if you wanted to have him officially scored. But
You're going to know pretty close.
it's going to give you real close to what you would have had. And to be honest with you, I didn't know about the H measurements. I thought it was the biggest area, but it's the smallest area, and you get 4 for each antler. So I didn't know that. That's
Spread
good.
credit.
Spread credit I've never heard of.
Yeah.
So that's interesting too. If I ever kill one like that, I'm counting the spread. I don't care what you say.
Well, there's a lot of people saying thank you. I thank you guys for pulling late hours tonight and pulling this together. It's been a lot of great information. 2 more questions that came in, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how would you go about getting a certified score? And then also, how many deer have you scored in Tennessee for yourself? How many have you scored?
Just a guess. I mean, I've got a book that I try to keep up with them. I don't have them all in it, but I guess since 2003, I don't know. I'm going to say, I bet 800, just a guess. Now, a lot of them won't go in the registry or won't make Boone and Crockett, but I will score them and tell the people, okay, your gross score is this. So I've scored a lot of deer. And since 2003, several of them have went into the registry or Boone and Crockett. My first one was a 2004 deer out of Dixon County, and it was a typical 174.5. And then I've had a couple of several non-typicals going to the Boone and Crockett registry, all-time registry, and they've got to be over 195. So I've scored maybe 8 to 10 that were over 195. And probably 8 to 10 or so that were over 170 typical.
Wow.
Out of that, you're saying 800 deer, I'm just guessing 800 deer I've scored. So I've got about 10 that made Boone and Crockett typical and about 10 that made Boone and Crockett non-typical. So percentages aren't great as far as getting in, but that's why that number's high, because it's not something you take every day.
So if somebody wanted to get one scored, way to get a hold of somebody.
Websites, usually they have somebody that's Boone and Crockett certified in your area. And like I say, there's not a lot of them. We don't charge to come out and do it. So a lot of people say, well, how much do I owe you for coming? It's all kind of a volunteer thing to come to somebody's place or go to an area to score one. So there's no charge for it. There's no fee. It's just a matter of getting someone that has the time to come do it. And the issue a lot of times is they want it scored within a few days of killing it. That's a green score. And as a scorer, I know that I'm going to have to go back in 60 days and score it again. We really like to do it when it's dried. Now, in the case of like the Tucker buck, when I saw it, okay, I'm going to go score it because I want to know what that thing scores. And I was out there the next day to score that one. But if it's something that's going to make the registry or going to make the minimum Boone and Crockett, Hope and Young, yeah, you could probably get your green score yourself and get an idea, but we'd rather come out and do the dry score, the 60-day score, time-wise.
Awesome. And real quick, just rough estimate, how many think you've green scored your career? All of them?
A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. I don't know, a bunch of green scores, and then I would go back and score again. But that's when when I was an officer, I had more time to do that. I'm not I'm in the field, but I'm not in a county in the field like in that capacity that I was when I first started doing this, and I had a lot of time to go do that. So, I live in an area where a lot of good deer are killed. So, if I was a scorer and I lived in portions of the state where you don't see as many good deer or don't have as many quality deer, you're not going to be asked to score as many. But up there, it's a constant constant possibility of scoring one weekly if you really put yourself out there. And that's a lot of time.
So one other question, since you're out of Montgomery County, what's the largest you've seen come out of Montgomery County?
Well, we kind of look at it as Fort Campbell probably has the biggest deer. And a portion of it is Montgomery County. So I have seen some really big deer come off of Fort Campbell. The biggest, most impressive deer I've ever seen out of Montgomery County itself is probably the teeter buck. And it was killed in 1998. It was at the time, the largest muzzleloader buck ever taken in the state, or it was probably the largest buck ever taken non-typical in the state. It's the most impressive buck that I think I have ever seen at Montgomery. The frame on this thing is just massive, and it's like something you would see from Iowa, but it was right there grown, northern part of the county, right where the GE and the Hemlock and the Google facility are sitting now. That farm's gone, where the teeter buck was killed.
Hate to see that property go.
Oh, it's gone. It's going. It's so flat and level. It's easy to go in and put infrastructure and develop it.
Wow.
And if you want to do a score on your own deer, the score sheets, you can find them from Boone and Crockett.
Score sheets are online, easy, and they really the score sheets on the back, if you read them, they give you instructions on how to do typical deer, very easy. Non-typical deer, fairly easy. But when you get into non-typical on the level of the Tucker buck, that gets into the craziness. But a general non-typical with a split or a kicker or a typical deer, the instructions on those sheets are self-explanatory. What I've shown you is just where you start on places, how to mark lines, common stuff that I see or get questions about.
And that Tucker buck, I meant to ask this earlier. Is this still the non-typical world record, or has that been passed on now?
At the time it was taken, it was the hunter killed world record buck. Now there has been one taken in Illinois that is going to beat it. There was another one taken in Kansas that is going to beat it. When they do their awards program in 2 more years, it will be instead of the number 1 hunter taken, it will be like the number 4 hunter taken. And that's how quickly the non-typical world changes. The typical is still there. It was killed in 1993, I think. It's still sitting there. Our typical record of 186 and I think 1/8 or so killed in Cumberland County in 56, 58. That deer still stands, but we are seeing some deer come along that are going to get close to it. We had one 2-3 years ago taken. It was poached. It was a typical 12, and it was going to be right at it. And it was just about an inch or so from that same score. So we're getting some deer that are coming on. That I see the typical score getting surpassed in the next 5 or so years.
Wow. It's great to see Tennessee up there in the ranks, competing with some of the other states that have had big deer for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. I know everybody appreciates you guys taking the time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you guys.
Okay. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all again sometime. Keep an eye on our website. Keep an eye on our Facebook channels, and join us again for another virtual class here down the road. But we appreciate you guys hanging out with us.